Coming up, the NBA offseason is upon us, and the Brooklyn Nets still play the waiting game on giving the fans what they want to know about Nic Claxton. That doesn't mean that other names on the market, from Collin Sexton trade rumors to OG and Anunoby looking for big paydays from the New York Knicks, could impact how Brooklyn approaches this interesting offseason heading towards the draft. We dive in on it all coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. He's Doug Norrie. I'm Adam Marmot. We thank you, as always, for making us your first listen of the day. We are 100% free on all those great platforms. And let you know, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started today. And Doug, when we get started is... there's some other things not related to Nic Claxton, because I think the news we hoped we'd be breaking sooner than later was at least that we're hearing the negotiation table has been formed. The chairs are set down. Claxton and Sean Marks, Joe Tsai, they're all there in the room, and they're starting to talk about what this contract's going to look like. Instead, I don't want to say radio silence, but we're getting a lot of drips and drabs about the league narratives with nothing coming directly about Claxton and the Nets.
Yeah, I actually wonder if there's a piece of this where like the where the league has where the league said something like, hey, I know the rules say 12 a.m. after the finals, and if everyone could just chill out for a second and let the Celtics let the Celtics have their thing, and let's bask in the glory of a finals, especially after an NBA playoffs. I don't know, probably largely disappointing just from a series intrigue perspective.
Yeah,
I wonder if because in the past it's been hilarious around how free agency has worked. It's like 12:01 already signed. It's like, man, that was fast. I mean, I've been part of the negotiations before. It's rarely you can get them done in 1 minute. Right. So I do wonder if there's sort of a league-wide protocol that said, look, these are the rules. We probably know you're going to be talking, through other channels. We get it. But let's just hold the announcements because there haven't been any free agency announcements. The only real news, and I'm sure we're going to talk about it, is OG Anunoby and the Knicks might be a little kind of far apart.
Yeah.
And other than that, so now that we're, a day and a half into this thing, so, rounding back to Claxton, I do wonder if it's more of a league-wide memo that just went into the shredder, or rather than just, no one can agree on contracts because they're just trying to have a new way to do business around this news.
Yeah, and you mentioned OG Anunoby. We're going to talk about him and whether or not, the risk reward of making big trades for players when you presume that they're going to re-sign with you. But obviously there seems to be some dollar amount there where now it's speculated 35 up to max contract $1 million a year for OG is available for him. Could be coming from his side, could be coming from his agents. We don't know for sure. Also Collin Sexton. But the last note, just on the Nic Claxton piece of it, the one thing that we did get is that Jalen Smith for the Pacers. We just talked about the Pacers in a different facet with Obi Toppin and maybe the Nets. Could they get in on one of these low 8th overall former first-round pick players? Jalen Smith is going to go to free agency, declining his north of $5 million player option. And it at least starts to paint that different picture. We've talked about Hartenstein before. We talk about Nic Claxton. The start of the off season and just getting indications around maybe some other rules around the league helps you kind of inform how maybe quick, to your point, whether it's NBA driven or not, how quick you need to be to get to the negotiation table, or if the Brooklyn Nets, specifically Nic Claxton, feel like we can be patient. Let's maybe just see how do things unfold here with the Knicks and with Hartenstein. What does that number look like? Does any team make a big trade for a center that starts to open up the market in a different way? I wonder if the Nets are willing to play calculated chicken and saying, yeah, we think it's 20 to 25 million, but maybe the market tells us it could be a little bit lower or a little more team friendly. And then we can get into those waters rather than being quick like they were with Cameron Johnson to say, hey, here's that big contract, baby. Oh, It looks like we may have stepped in it a little bit when it comes to that one.
Well, and the one difference was like Cameron Johnson was restricted free agency, right? So like, and so it's like, well, they're gonna have the ability to match, and you might as well just get it out of the way. And if you're just like, hey, we're just gonna match it, like there is a difference there, I think. But in general, I agree with your idea too, because there is a push and pull here where both sides there's risk on both sides for waiting, right? The risk on just not coming in with your best and final offer right away and waiting to see if the market plays out could mean you end up getting in a bidding war. And now you feel sort of beholden to, because like, it's like, oh, there's more players in here. Like, oh, OKC, Detroit, like there's other teams in here that are going to vie for his services. The other way, and that's good for the player, right? And I'm always proponent of just go get the most money you can. I always think that I've never begrudged any player for going out and getting the most money, especially these guys that are like, maybe this is going to be their one crack at like the massive contract. Right. And so there's that piece, but then for the player too, right? It's like, well, there's the same thing. It's like, accept the first offer or the landscape dries up really quickly.
Yeah.
Right. Like Hartenstein, like he goes and signs somewhere, and that's kind of the end of the bull run on centers, or Jalen Smith resign. Like, there's a few things that can happen, and all of a sudden the well is dried up in terms of like free agent money. And now you go back to the Nets and they're like, well, it's a lower number now because the market's not there. So it's not a perfect science. I think most times these teams have a pretty good sense out there of like who has it and who's going for it. Same with the players and the agents. And I think there's a lot of there has to be just tons of communication that happens on the sidelines. But there is still, sometimes you get those Dennis Schroeder things where it's like Lakers offer you a big contract and you're like, nope. And then all of a sudden it's, $100 million less. Yeah. I don't think that's not the risk here. I don't think with Claxton, but it's just like, it paints a picture of how it's like, it's never an exact science.
I was chuckling a little bit there just because the good news is from Nic Claxton's perspective is the Brooklyn Nets don't seem to really be aware of what's happening in the overall NBA landscape. So nothing could happen on the market for you. You come back, you say, remember now, you drafted me, Sean Marks, you developed. He goes, I know. And that's worth about $22.5 million a year. Don't worry, buddy. We got you covered. But it will be, and it is interesting to think about that and how it's going to impact the rest of some of the Nets offseason. Coming up here in a second, though, there have been some rumblings about Utah and how they want to go in their youthful direction, making some veterans available. And then, as Doug mentioned, OG Anunoby. Could the big dollars be found somewhere else other than New York? We'll dive into that coming up here in just 1 second.
All right, before we get to that, tell you about our friends over at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, patience. That's a formula for winning championship. It's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. You got superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, so much more. Maybe it's speed, maybe it's power, maybe it's style. eBay Motors has you covered with over 122 million parts. For your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, your parts guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or your money back. With eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash, with all the parts you need at the prices you want. It's easy to make your car the MVP. Bring home those huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Motors, Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers.
As we continue today's Locked On Nets episode, we remind you that coming up, we're going to have more draft coverage. Obviously, we have multiple more prospects to get into here, including, man, I got a younger brother of a current player. I don't know, Christie, a little kid out there, a little rail thin player. Sometimes a prospect that the Brooklyn Nets are into. We'll talk about all those coming up later this week. But right now, the other thing that I think we are getting, Doug, is the NBA off season. We're okay. Everyone calm down a second here. Starts to unfold. Is some teams that we've heard little speculations about the direction they want to go. Throughout the course of last season, it was Lauri Markkanen, maybe the Jazz. Could he be available? Would they take a haul of picks? No, it turns out they like having young, talented players, and they want to build around that young core. And they got great returns on some of their draft picks becoming starters for that team. Now, when you look at them, we've heard rumors about John Collins being available via trade, and now there's some speculation with 2 years left, making $18 million in the upcoming season, that Collin Sexton could be another player potentially that Utah would put on the market. How interesting do you see that from a Brooklyn Nets perspective, knowing that while we think it's rebuild time, there's also this version of the team where they want to have some viability around Mikal Bridges, Cameron Johnson, and the vets?
Yeah, it'd be interesting with Sexton here. He's on a pretty good contract. He's scheduled to make just 18 million next year,
Just
and
18
then
million, Doug.
19 million the year after. Like that's a really pretty advantageous contract for a guy who's 25 years old and has flashed, real NBA scoring ability.
Yeah.
It's I think he'll have a market. I think there's clearly teams that'll look at that and say, it's just funny though, because I get why he's probably like an overlapping piece here with like who they have in the backcourt with Keontae George. And, it's like maybe that's just like it's going to be hard to see them sort of totally fitting together over the long term. Right. So, like, I get why maybe they might want to flip him into something else or maybe multiple pieces here. And they have a lot of draft picks coming their way, too. He'd be a guy like if the Nets were going that like rebuilding route. I would think that like this would be sort of where they might want to go. Again, they get a little trapped in it's not like they have tons of win now pieces to send off, except for like Dorian Finney-Smith, who just, it's like contractually obligated to bring him up anytime the Nets would think about a trade because
That's right.
it's like really like one of the few guys they can trade.
It's like a tick.
So yeah, like this would be a guy that would be really, really interesting to me. I worry at time, 40% from three, like good off the catch and shoot, good off the dribble. Not a great assist guy, though. We did see those numbers tick up a little bit last year because they had him playing more point guard, just true point guard coming out of the gate. Yeah, I like it. It's just like hard to see the path, right? And that's the problem.
Yeah, and that's 25 years old for him as well, and that's where you say like, well, if the Nets are going the rebuild direction, he's a player that could make sense for them. But he's in between. He's in between the youth that they have on the roster and a couple of years behind the Mikal Bridges and Cam Johnsons of the world. And I don't know. This is the other thing that we brought up before, but that sometimes when players like these, and maybe I mentioned it when it was the John Collins of it all for Utah too, and saying, oh, like, he'd be an interesting player to bring in if you're thinking about wanting to compete now and you're the Brooklyn Nets, is what are you sending back out for them? And this is usually the line in the sand, I think, for both of us is, well, I'm not really touching the Phoenix picks to get a player,
right.
to bring a player in here. Maybe the Dallas first. Oh, okay, we could have the conversation. And when you get into the player, well, then it's, well, would you send Cam Thomas out in a move like this? Because he's one of your more valuable established young talents. But what does that really then mean for you 2 years from now when the Collin Sexton contract is up? And
he might just be better than Collin Sexton in 3 years. Like he's 20. Like he might be better than him now. Probably not. Yeah. But like you know what I mean. But the point being, it's close enough that 3 years, give Cam Thomas 3 years, like, and maybe it's not as cost controlled 3 years from now. And like, it's, that's the Sexton at 18 million makes a big difference. But yeah, sorry to interrupt, but like, yes, no. It's like, yeah, you're not sending the Phoenix pick out. And then you might have a guy on the roster who's already better, probably is. And then after that, like, what are we really talking about? And so, and like, you can't really pair. It doesn't like, it's probably not going to be great to pair those two guys together, even in a rebuild mode, because I'm not sure it helps either development. So then you're just really kind of pot stuck on your path.
That was the other part of that too, where it was, as you mentioned, a little more facilitating for Sexton in Utah this past season, but by and large, it's not what you think of first when you look at him. Okay, so now we've got two, he's 6'3", look at the backcourt, you go, okay, great, you guys can maybe go get buckets, but again, who's going to set the table for everybody here, which is this is why I think philosophically, when you and I talk about, hey, if there's a young player, we just had this conversation with the Pacers, if there's a young player at a low cost that you can bring in, young talent acquisition is the mode that the Nets should be in. And it's a lot easier, at least from my perspective, to say, yeah, young player X making $5 to $7 million with 2 or 3 years on a contract. We'll take a look at him. There's a good chance that player doesn't pan out. That's okay, because it doesn't cost you a lot to get him in the door. When you start to get into even these team-friendly contracts over the next 2 years for Collin Sexton at 18 and 19 million, you still come back to it and go, right, but it's going to cost you something. And it's probably going to cost you something that if you're looking at it from a success standpoint, what does Collin Sexton on the Brooklyn Nets for 2 years equal? And I know this and always goes to the larger picture of, if you had a superstar in the offseason and then that player is there, right? We go through those maturations of it. But ultimately, if you're going to spend, especially a first-round draft pick, a future first draft asset in a move like this, or any move like this, to turn around in 2 years and go, so that 2027, I think it is, Dallas Mavericks first-round pick or the Philly first-round pick. So that became what for us? Going from being a under 500 team to almost a 500 team. That's where for me, you have to keep stopping short on thoughts like this. I do have an interesting thing I want to bring up about Utah right now. But do you agree with that? That like this is always the weird spot the Nets are in right now for this specific season, which keeps making me feel like it's going to be harder and harder for them to make margin moves this offseason, because you look at it and you go cost versus result. It's never going to fully get there unless you're talking about real superstars.
Well, it's the problem of, and I think the Nets are actually in this problem for themselves too, is the problem of they not knowing the path. When you don't know the path, it becomes harder to see what the move should be. And the Nets are in a situation where, I mean, even Brian Lewis, like he had an article the other day where it's kind of off the cuff, but does mention it, something like, the path, like they're not maybe sure, like they know they have to pick a path, and maybe they haven't, right? Yeah. And I'm probably reading between the lines a little bit on that, but in general, this is the problem that I think, like, sometimes when we talk about the Nets, we are faced with this problem, and I actually think the Nets themselves are faced with the same problem. It's like, are we rebuilding, then taking on these young guys on decent contracts and sending back a player or two, like all of our veterans, make sense, right? Yeah. Okay, great. Or we're not, like, we're going for win now and it's all in for 2025, then no chance we can do this. But it's like they're not so clean, 100% cleanly set up for that. And so then And this is what ends up happening. So it ends up happening when we talk about Sexton. It ends up happening when we talk about Josh Giddey. Like, it ends up, who, by the way, with Giddey, year younger than Cam Thomas. We never mentioned that in the Giddey thing, but like, it happens when we talk about the guys from Indiana. It's like, I think, run into the same problems that the front office does, or is that, well, if we're on one path, this makes total sense. If we're on another path, it makes no sense. But we don't know the path. And when that's a question mark, then we just end up getting caught in between. I actually think it's like the high level issue that the Nets, from my guess, is like something like ownership on down, all the way to the fan. This is what causes the biggest consternation. Like, you just kind of don't know.
It's one of the reasons why, and we're going to get into, there's a couple other angles here for the offseason, including some deadline dates that are coming up. We talk about this big OG Anunoby situation with the New York Knicks that's interesting as well, and can impact a lot of teams in the league. But it is one of those things from a Brooklyn Nets perspective. I hate to, summon the name. It's like bringing up Rasputin. To the Ben Simmons of it all is just interesting from one standpoint. If he didn't exist, if his money, excuse me, not the person, that almost came out very aggressive. Oops. If his money didn't exist right now for the Brooklyn Nets, that would make this offseason fascinating in a different way. Not that it'd automatically be superstar X, Y, or Z or big, enormous trade, but you'd be just looking at it as, we can make a decision about Nic Claxton, and we can also look at these trades and say, let's bring in player X or Y and set the table. Bring in multiple players, maybe bring in a mid-level guy, a bench player. You could start to reshape the roster in a way that you didn't get to as efficiently as you may have liked when you made the KD trade, when you made the Kyrie trade, right? But you get that taken away from you because of that $40 million contract. Now, everyone keeps looking to 2020 next offseason, say 2025. That's the big year. That's great. But to your point, I think the inability to maybe make a couple of margin moves ahead of time is going to make that next offseason potentially a bit of a whirling dervish for Brooklyn. Okay, we got to move contracts. We got to bring in guys. We got to pivot. Young players, they're all available. They're not available. That same kind of process here where the short and long-term future gets a little bit clouded depending on what choices you make. So, as is always the case with Brooklyn, a little bit of a funky offseason, but we're just at the tip of it right now. And coming up here in a moment, the OG Anunoby situation with New York is a good reminder about going out and making big moves to bring in players when you don't necessarily know for sure they're going to be here long term. We'll get into that coming up here in just one moment.
All right, before we get to that, tell you about our friends over at FanDuel. Look, summertime means baseball. NBA Finals is over, but there's so much you can bet on when it comes to FanDuel. Right now, new customers are going to get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200. You can use to bet everything from the Finals MVP, which we has already done here, or who can hit one out of the park. When it comes to FanDuel right now, you got to look over Garrett Cole making his first start of the year for the Yankees. Minus 172 line over there for Garrett Cole. I'm going the other way with Baltimore. First game back, little rust, can't knock the rust off. I like the Baltimore side of that one. Look, go over to FanDuel right now. You can grab $200 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn. At a big win to your summer bucket list. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook.
All right, so as we tie a little bow,
right?
As we continue on here to wrap up the show, we take a look just at this OG Anunoby situation. I do, by the way, want to let people know, you circle back here later in the week, there's going to be a conversation at some point where I talk about the Collin Sexton, John Collins world where, hey, would you swap bodies like this with Brooklyn Nets players like Mikal Bridges, like Cameron Johnson? Would you get 2 years younger at two positions and send some guys out the door, maybe for future Cavs first-round picks unprotected later in the 2027 draft? Guys, content. That's what we're bringing for you 5 days a week. OG Anunoby, New York Knicks, he wants more money, wouldn't you know it, as is often the case. But are you surprised that wasn't kind of a set it and forget it in terms of the contract offer he was going to get from the Knicks? The injuries clearly had to play a factor there, but he has representation that is the son of one of the high-ranking executives with the New York Knicks. So there's like this felt like an instant marriage here, but now OG seems willing to at least say, just in case you're wondering, here's what the market might pay for me. And this is not a name that you would have anticipated teams being able to look at on the market.
Could be posturing. Could just be like, hey, let's not make it look like total collusion, right? Sure. Like, because there are relationships here. So I don't really take a ton from it. I think everyone would understand the nature of the NBA is that like guys are gonna go out look for, like no one should give discounts for anything. And so if I'm a player, I wouldn't give a single discount. I mean, with like the few examples of you've already been, you've been around for 20 years and now you're trying to win championships. Like otherwise, like I just never begrudge anybody for going out and getting the most money. You only get one chance to do it. That being said, like, is there anything to read from it? I actually don't think so. I saw that and I was like, this probably ends up like he's back there. And it's just like, it's a nice story to tell around how these guys aren't doing business on the sidelines. That was my initial take. I could be wrong about that, but that to me struck me as probably like not much of a huge thing. I really doubt other teams knowing the injury history, knowing that's not
the biggest problem for him.
Like knowing he's not probably like a grade 1 superstar. He's like a really nice, like ultra role player. Like, right. Like the Knicks are going to be awesome when we're awesome when he's on the court, but it's not like he can lead the team by himself. I just think when it's all said and done, he ends up as a Knick. And this is kind of like a story more than an actual, like, it feels like more smoke than fire, I guess.
The interesting part about it, like from a Knicks perspective is, and this would be a happy place to be in if you were the Brooklyn Nets right now. You look at that team and Julius Randle and Jalen Brunson and OG Anunoby, and you wonder about what is that ceiling going to be as they come into this next season. The chances are that even they'll bring back OG, then you'll still run into a Boston Celtics team, right? Or the interesting tie-in here, it's like when they said, well, would OG go to market? Philadelphia would be a team that would be interested in having those conversations. If not him, then they're looking at Paul George maybe. And you can see how the Eastern Conference and some of these teams, specifically like Philadelphia, maybe like Milwaukee, although they're in a hard spot from every asset and money standpoint right now, they're trying to recalibrate themselves after a letdown season. And the New York Knicks may end up being a very good team that is highly competitive, but might not get over the hump, get into the Eastern Conference Finals, making a finals appearance in this iteration of the team because they have a lot of older veteran players that are very good, but you wouldn't say after Jalen Brunson, who's clearly at least put himself in the, quote unquote fringe of superstar category, they maybe don't have that other guy. And I say all that not to put down the Knicks and the fans and their expectations. It's to say, you'd love to be there if you're Brooklyn. You'd love to be sitting here. Maybe we'll get to X point in the playoffs, but we'll see what happens. Worst case, we are mid-tier team, as in 4th seed or better in the Eastern Conference, and we're going to be competitive, highly competitive for the next 2-3 seasons going forward with opportunities to restructure, rebuild, bring in new players. The Nets aren't that team. They're not the version of the Philadelphia 76ers who say, maybe one more shot here with Joel Embiid before we make decisions about his long-term future. It's such a frustrating thing that as we wait for the Nic Claxton news, we sit here and say, and that doesn't really change one way or the other what the short-term outlook is over this upcoming season. It's a reminder of what the Nets are trying to sort out for themselves and what this draft, next offseason, trade deadline, this upcoming season is all going to shape things, I think, for Brooklyn, and maybe it thrusts them right into this type of conversation like the Knicks and other teams are this year.
Yeah, and like times where you overpay for guys like this, maybe like with an Anunoby type, is like when you can see yourself maybe on the cusp, right? Like, are we right away from the? Is this like what gets? We overpay a little bit now to get into the Eastern Conference Finals, or maybe get like lucky and run hot through the playoffs and make the finals. That I think is fine, right? I think it's it's not the same thing. It's like, when do you overpay in a trade thing for James Harden? It's like when adding him can get you to the finals. Right. And I think that was probably correct. And it didn't work out, but those are the times you sort of overpay.
Yeah.
Where you don't overpay on role players and other guys like this, and this could be like the Cameron Johnson piece, it could end up being a Claxton piece, is like, where you don't overpay on guys who aren't 1A stars is two reasons. One is like, if you maybe don't have a market that can really attract these guys on any free agency level, like you're the Indianas, the OKCs, like, hey, it's always gonna be hard to get guys to come here. Right. Like, it's just like, we're not going to, when we sit down in the meetings, we're just not going to have as much to sell. Or, it's just, well, okay. So you have that problem, but in general, like, if you overpay for these guys now, when you don't have a clear path, it just like exacerbates the problem later. When you do want to like bring in guys, or like you don't have enough money, or these don't end up being the correct fits. Like, let's say Claxton, this is not a knock on Claxton, but let's say Claxton, you sign him this year, and then Giannis becomes available. Mm-hmm. Well, Claxton isn't like a super clean fit with Giannis,
right? Because
of like the way they play. And now you kind of he's kind of got to be a part of the trade, right? Because you just can't really, you know what I mean? So it's not a knock on Claxton at all. I'm just picking out this one guy that like it might not be perfect with, but now you have him on a big contract, and now it's, you know what I mean? So those are the problems you can sometimes get yourself into.
No, 100%. And that's why the rest of this offseason is going to be fascinating. We're heading towards the draft next week. And coming up, as I mentioned, we're not only going to have, there's some Day'Ron Sharpe kind of rumors. Doug mentioned this yesterday. If you don't watch the podcast every single day, first of all, shame on you. But second of all, Doug mentioned that maybe the league looks at Day'Ron Sharpe a little bit higher than the Brooklyn Nets currently do. And there's some rumblings that suggest that might be the case, and teams that could be interested in acquiring his rebounding skill set. So we're going to talk about that, more draft prospect replacements for the Brooklyn Nets if they get into this upcoming draft class, and then also key dates. We've got deadlines for Trendon Watford. We've got luxury tax information that came out about the league, which is an absolute disaster for some teams out on the West Coast right now. And then where we stand on Mikal Bridges, who will have an extension eligibility coming up at the beginning or just before the season starts this year. So really, really jam-packed stuff here leading up to the draft. So Doug will tell you why you shouldn't miss out.
Well, you just told us why you shouldn't miss out. I'll just tell you how you won't miss out.
How not to miss out. Now you tell me.
Subscribe to Locked On Nets where you listen to over on YouTube, and subscribe to Locked On Nets wherever you listen to podcasts. It's just that easy. 2 clicks, literally 2 clicks. It helps us a ton. Totally free to you. Helps us a ton. Locked On Nets over on YouTube. Locked On Nets podcast, wherever you listen to podcasts.
Show me the money. That's Jerome Maguire.
Oh, was he the one that said it? Because I don't think he said it.
I think it was at each other, right? He's saying, show me the money. He's screaming it in the phone. Everyone's looking at him weird. And then I think just after that, he misses out on Cushman, and then he gets fired. So,
either way, one of the all-time great posts. We're back again tomorrow. Talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
Basketball.